What's up, world? It's your boy, Mike Muse. Welcome to the Mike Muse Show. I hope you guys all had a fantastic holiday that was just Thanksgiving. The holidays are officially amongst us. It is here. I had to admit, folks, I'm really excited for this holiday season. I usually don't get the holiday spirit till probably about a week before Christmas, but man, I am in it. I'm like, where's my Christmas tree? I want to put it up now. I'm even actually doing the shopping, but I think it's because I'm like this Amazon Prime guy now, so I'm always ordering things just for fun. And so now I'm super excited to get into the buying season now. I've already shipped some stuff to my mother already, so she should be reading the Michelle Obama book, Becoming. So that was her early Christmas gift to her already. So I don't know, man. I'm just excited for cheesy Christmas music and movies and cookies and gifts and just really hanging out and kicking it with the fam and some friends. So tell me how your holiday season's been going so far, how your Thanksgiving, and if you're actually even getting into all like these cyber sales, and if you're doing these online shopping, and if you're an Amazon Prime fanatic like I am. But listen, with that, we have some serious conversation to be had. There is a lot of stuff that is happening in our world currently, and some people may not be as happy right now. And there are, as we talk about our families coming together, there are families who are fighting for themselves and fighting for their loved ones and fighting for their kids' future, in the future of where they should live. And I'm talking about the migrant caravan that is coming from Central America into the border of the United States. And we witnessed on Sunday afternoon more of a dust up that we saw in the border of Tijuana. With individuals trying to cross into San Diego, and we've seen the blockade that existed, and the individuals tried to go around the Mexican and U.S. patrol border agents, and they saw a path that was opening, and they decided to make a run for it. As a result of that, it caused a lot of serious injuries, caused a lot of chaos at the border, and we saw tear gas that was being used against the migrants who were trying to come into America, who are seeking asylum. And I thought it was important for us just to really do a deep dive into this conversation and to really peel it apart and to look at all the many facets of it. And I just want to just first start by saying that this are individuals who are seeking legal asylum. I know there's been confusion in conversations and online that the illegals are coming over here and sneaking into America. But what individuals have to recognize and realize is that America's Constitution does allow individuals from countries around the world to seek asylum. And so this is what these individuals are doing, are seeking asylum legally. There is also too confusion that all these individuals are Mexican, and that's not the case at all. These individuals are coming from Central America, from Honduras and from Guatemala and from the likes of Central America. So there's also too another spell that we had to get over. And the tensions are high, and it all comes down to perception, right? In one instant, these are individuals who are trying their best to fill out asylum forms here in the United States. But our government currently right now, the Trump administration, has limited the amount of cases that are being heard. So now we're down to approximately hearing 100 asylum cases per day. Think about that. For the thousands of individuals that are already over here, and for the thousands of individuals that could be on their way a month from now. And let's not forget about asylum seekers come from Europe. They come from Germany. They come from France. They come from Italy. They come from Japan, from China, from Southeast Asia. They come from Africa. They come from Australia. So then those are cases that need to be heard too as well. So currently we're experiencing a backlog. And so the question is, should we be allocating more resources for more judges to hear more cases to be, processed quicker? Because right now these individuals are being held or contained in a small area of Tijuana right by the border. And currently the government of Tijuana and the local municipality has set aside where there is a 5,000 person sports arena in Tijuana where these individuals are being housed at now. But Tijuana officials have come out and said that they don't have, the capacity to maintain this forever. They don't have the money and the resources to keep providing these individuals, with food and with well-being and protection and security. So eventually we're going to have to come to this moment, and President Trump has issued something really interesting. He's made a statement now where he wants individuals to be processed in Mexico as they seek asylum. Well, that goes beyond the scope of our Constitution. Constitutionally, it says that individuals must be physically present in the United States in order to seek asylum. And so is this change that he's looking for in the administration, is it unconstitutional? So these are all things that we have to uncover and unpack. And I'm going to do a deep dive into the policy in just one second. But I thought before I get to the policy, sometimes you have to have perception and you have to have an understanding and you have to have the will of the people on your side before you can even change policy or reverse policy. And all that starts with brand. All that starts with perception and images and imagery and definitely what we see on our television sets and on social media, on Instagram and on Twitter. And I'm of the belief that this policy is going to be one purely based on images, purely based on imagery. What do we see as Americans as we watch our evening news? Do we see kids, running to the border with rocks in their hands, or that's having tear gas thrown on them because they shouldn't come, being quote unquote violent? Those are terms that we're starting to hear. Or do we actually see mothers and fathers with their infant children seeking refuge from gang-torn Honduras and Guatemala, where young kids are being recruited into gangs on a daily basis, and they feel like that's their only choice, and so they're running from that for safety of their lives? And so what images do we see? And I couldn't think of a better person to help us guide us through this conversation on images and perception than a fantastic individual who goes by the name of Michelle O'Grady. Michelle is a founder and CEO of Team Friday. She's a socially conscious entrepreneur, and ladies and gentlemen, she's a civic thought leader of over 15 years of experience in communications and creative services and business and public policy. She leads across functional creative teams focused on building purpose, furthering causes, and creating impact through collaboration and innovation. They've developed messages and innovative solutions for a variety of organizations within Los Angeles, the state of California, and also to just America at large. And Michelle serves on many boards within her community of the Esperanza Community Housing Corporation and Latinos in Media and Arts. She's also on the Concerned Capital and Defined American Advisory Boards and is a member of Common. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Mike Muse Show the fantastic, dynamic Michelle O'Grady. What's happening, Michelle?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for being on, and thanks for having us on for this conversation. When I was really thinking about this topic and conversation, I really believe this is going to be one based on image and perception. And I couldn't think of a better person who deals with this on a daily basis than you, someone who is of Mexican heritage, someone who has lived in Mexico, and also someone who currently lives in Los Angeles. And this is the center of the storm, if you will, right now. Now that is, crossing the borders of Tijuana and San Diego. And so I guess just on rip, what are your thoughts, Michelle, about what you're seeing and what you were witnessing on the television sets?
Well, it's undeniably heartbreaking. I think when we look at the images that have come out, some pretty prominent images from Reuters about the families and just the mother and children that are fleeing the violence in Honduras and Central American countries. It's hard. It's hard to watch, and it's hard to see as an American that's our response to the activities down and south of the border.
Now, Michelle, what are your perceptions of it? Because right now, Americans are, and let's be honest, right now, we're not even having civics courses anymore taught in our high schools anymore. And so individuals are struggling just to understand basic governance of America government, right? And so let alone understanding anthropology and social studies and the difference between, Central Americans versus Mexicans, right? And so talk to us about your feeling as a Mexican American, what it feels like to have everyone just grouped in this category of Mexicans coming over here. And also, too, what's a feeling that you feel as a Mexican American where there's now this whole term of all the illegal immigrants now are getting conflated with legal asylum seekers?
Yeah, I think the perception, there's a lot of work to do that's needed to be done and continues to need to be done on perception of who is affected by immigration and who is who's determined the Latino, right? We use Latino. It's a word made up in America. It's not a word used in Latin American countries, and it's a word to define, multiple Spanish-speaking language countries into one identity, which creates a bit of harm when we start to break down what the policy should look like and what the perception is of Central Americans versus Mexicans versus South Americans. And so we're seeing, my personal perception is, it's because we're not teaching civic classes, we don't understand the historical nature or the intervening that America has done in Central America to kind of have created this rupture in people needing to flee their countries and then being looped into Mexican because it's the nearest country. And because, especially in California, is the most dominant ethnicity of a Latin American country, it's hard. I feel for the families that are fleeing from Honduras and El Salvador because they're not able to tell their story. And it gets lumped into the Mexican American story, which is unfortunate as a part of that and how it relates to immigration and perception of who's actually fleeing and why they're fleeing. I think the perception of why they're fleeing is conflated into, what is illegal and what is legal immigration, what is illegal immigration, what is asylum, and we don't even know what all of those terminologies mean. We're just now creating sound bites and issue talking points from various news media sources to talk about what is a very complex and situation that needs to be more contextualized between the history, the people, and what's reality.
Exactly. And what's interesting, Michelle, and the reason I want your point of view too as well, as having spent time in Mexico, we're seeing now Mexico is becoming the center point of diplomacy when it comes to dealing with this migrant caravan in ways that we really haven't seen Mexico being used in diplomatic relationships to moderate, sides. We always have been dealing with Mexico from this, as you mentioned perfectly, this illegal conversation. They're trying to come over here and build the wall and borders and recently what comes into tariffs. But it's a whole nother conversation we're having now with Mexico and the incoming president really having to moderate this discussion of asylum and how it should be processed. I thought it was interesting, Michelle, that the Pew Research Center issued a report in 2017 that really talked about perceptions of Mexicans and how they feel about Americans and how Americans feel about Mexicans. And as Mexicans are living closer to the U.S. border, they have more of a favorable perception of America. But those who are living more south of the U.S. border have a less favorable response to and viewpoints of America. On the inverse, Americans who are living close to the border have a favorable reception, but you get further out, it gets a little bit more difficult on their views of that. How do you see conversation you may be having with your family members or friends who are still in Mexico? How are they perceiving this caravan? How are they looking at it is there a nationalist point of view that is being discussed right now? What are the roles that our Mexicans are playing even south of the border of Central America and Mexico? And what role are they having in allowing this caravan to continue?
Yeah, I think most Mexicans and even most Mexican Americans feel like they're the bridge, right? They're the bridge between these countries and America and are wholeheartedly kind of embracing the caravan and aiding in whatever possible. I think there was nationalist protest, and every country has some sort of nationalism. Mexico is no different. So, you are seeing that kind of conflated in the perception of the media and used as kind of like these kind of sound bites for, people that are opposing this illegal asylum seeking caravan. But I think, most people are really kind of embracing and realizing that we're all in this together. I think you see more acceptability on the border towns because there's so much business that comes between both sides of the border. They're not just it's not just you and them. It's that they're just the only thing that kind of separates them is a fence, and so they need to rely on each other in order to survive, and that's the whole cyclical survival notion of their whole region. And so what you see when you get out on the outskirts, and so when you go to southern Mexico, you go to the southern tips of Mexico that are borderline, Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador and all of the Central American countries, you see a different perception of America because you've seen the destruction and things firsthand of what America policies have done in those regions. So, we have to see illegal, legal immigrants as participants in our society and participants in our business and participants in our economy, and I think it's something that we don't lean into the perception on, is that we actually, most immigrants, are who are able to work and able to get INTIN numbers are able to contribute into our economy, and they don't actually get any social services from that. So that's a perception that I think needs to be demystified. There's a lot of perceptions that need to be demystified.
I mean, and what you're talking to, Michelle, you hit it right on the money in terms of the economic aspect of it. The annual legal flow of economic trade between the United States and Mexico is actually over $300 billion each year.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a huge amount of money that goes back and forth between these two countries. And we have been able to live within peace, if you will, in terms of allowing that to come down, right? But it always comes down to like these narratives, right? These dueling narratives throughout the entire thing is, yes, there is $300 billion exchange between these two countries, and we have an integrated relationship, and even those who are working over here legally to participate in our economy. But then the other alternative chooses to look away from all the economic trade and legal crossings and just see nothing but undocumented immigration, violence, and drugs and wars, and these words that we're hearing, which comes to point into the work that you do in terms of branding and messaging and communications, because we have to use that word now because it's a thing now, right? Mainstream media, right? So there's no that mainstream media is helping to perpetuate these ideas and these stereotypes, right? By actually showing like these images. But something that we're very familiar with, Michelle, in our everyday work and studies with YouTube, where it's actually showing that there's findings there's a social media study that is out there that shows that 52% of the videos constructed on YouTube show a sympathetic view of the border, right? And I think that's more of the families and the children versus 48% of the videos constructed show the unsympathetic view. That's more of the violent tendencies. And I think that's a power of technology, is allowing citizens, both of Mexican heritage and those of us on the American side, are able to use our cameras, right? Or the cameras on our phone in order to capture the content, because we're not actually just looking for the clickbait or the headline, but actually just looking for the human narrative. And so how do you see this as a communicator, right? As someone who owns an agency that is based on communication?
I mean, I think it's not just images, but it's also the words. Like even the fact that we're like keep repeating that it's like a, media is saying, Trump calls it an invasion. Like every time we even use that word, it kind of associates the caravan with an invasion. And so we have to be careful, just not with the image that we associate, but also with the words that we're using to associate, and kind of debunking as communicators. Like we have to debunk things that are not true and just associations that are not true. And so I think, you are seeing like people just trying to find real information. And thankfully, we are in the age of technology where people can capture true images and they can capture video that's not altered and kind of upload that and start to help with that perception. I think as communicators and as people that think about like what the images are, I mean, we also have to think about it in media, in our new media, and how we continually like see roles in like popular culture for Latinos. Oftentimes we're the help or the drug dealer or something of kind of like a disposable character. And so showcasing Latinos and like all their contributions to society is something that we are eagerly actively seeking to change, and also requiring and talking to media outlets about their need to kind of change that perception as well.
Right. So here on the Mike Muse Show, Michelle, you're very familiar with it. We're all about like trying to help find solutions, right? So, I can get on my soapbox. I'm sure you can too. We're human. We all can get on our soapbox. But what's important is that we're trying to offer up some solutions. And so just looking and discussing that case study about YouTube and videos, do you think it's maybe important for those of us who live near the borders, right? And who may live in cities such as like Los Angeles and San Diego, and who live on the border towns in Texas, to really take it upon themselves to showcase other narratives of the asylum process, right? Or what's happening at the border, or to maybe get firsthand accounts of individuals who are trying to get into the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some trusted publications that are already trying to do that. I think, as citizen documenting becomes, more of a thing to lean on as it is already, I think we should all be looking at that, right, when we're trying to change the narrative or at least tell the truthful narrative of what's happening in our communities. I think, we can't depend on the sound bites and the click and the clickbait headlines to tell us news anymore. We really have to kind of like seek it out and look at resources that we trust and kind of go and see where the I guess the communications and the narrative building is stemming from. Like, what is that? What's the real purpose that they're communicating the way that they're communicating?
So basically, you're asking my listeners to challenge their cognitive dissonance to see if they can put. So it's pretty much a tall order, Michelle.
We ask everybody to do.
You must be going to get your PhD. You're giving me some very PhD scholarly thing. I was looking for some simple solution. We could talk about at brunch, talk about the barbershop, and you're giving me cognitive dissonance. Got it.
Solutions to the media, the media narrative problem, and I think this goes for all communities of color. We're always having to challenge, what is the perception of who we are. Right now, it's Latinos and the caravan, but we've had refugee crises from the Middle East, from Asia, there's a huge Haitian refugee population in Tijuana right now. There's stories of Mexican restaurants who have retrained their staff to cook Haitian food for these Haitian refugees.
That's amazing.
And so, how we band together on the perception of who we allow to tell us news is something that I think we need to challenge always to make sure that we're getting the right story.
So you raise a good point, and I just kind of want your honest opinion, and I'll go first, and I'll be vulnerable, Michelle, to give you some covering. I'm affected by this, and I'm not Mexican American. I don't have any Latino heritage, in my constitution, in my DNA, and I get so upset when I watch these stories and I hear people on the streets talk about this issue from this very brown perspective of Mexicans and just Americans, as if they're the only ones seeking asylum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as if they're the only ones trying to cross into the United States, and as if they're the only ones who are here illegally, right? But I know there's others individuals who are in Southeast Asia, in Japan, in China, coming from Europe, who overstay their welcome, overstay their visas, right? I know individuals in Israel, right? In Pakistan, all these places that may even get married for citizenship, right? And so we know this is happening, right? And so I get so frustrated, though, how we seem to only want to focus on the brown population. I'm just wondering, just from you as a personal perspective, how do you feel personally when you hear these type of things, knowing there's a whole demographic of communities who are doing the exact, I'm not saying it's right? I'm not here to say it's right or wrong, but there's a whole set of countries and demographics who are doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, honestly, I just think that we, as all of these communities, are kind of coming to are affected by this, right? Like, all communities that know that they have, individuals seeking asylum in this country need to kind of band together in this conversation. I think it's largely been dominated by the Latino, crisis at the border, what have you, whatever you want to call it. I don't have the language for it right now, but
it changes every day.
It changes every day. But, I think it's because Trump has single-handedly tried to demonize Latin American countries for a really long time, and Central American countries and Mexico, and so he's just further exacerbating it. And so they, we're the point of reference for right now. I do think that can change at any moment, because we don't know what he's going to say or what his next target is going to be. And so I think that that's important to think about, how all communities that have asylum seeking individuals and individuals coming here, and overstaying their visas for whatever reason, need to kind of band together in this conversation.
I like how you did
in order to make sure that we kind of highlight everybody that's being affected, because it's not just a Latino crisis.
I like how
It's
you
a
threw
world
that
crisis.
that challenge down. We might need to get that going. Hashtag asylum challenge.
Yeah.
Because I just really, we're making light of it, Michelle. But I feel like there's so many more doing the exact same damn thing, and but for some reason we're
Yeah.
only focused on Mexicans, and again, and Mexicans aren't even doing asylum, which is also the whole thing that we have to work so hard
Yeah.
to
Like we
debunk all
have,
that narrative.
you
But
know, we
Michelle,
have like a big net immigration problem. You know
yeah,
what I
we
mean?
do.
Like there, like that's a whole nother conversation
Well,
that's not even being talked about with the perception.
Well, that's why you have to come back on the Mike Muse show, Michelle. You have been fantastic, just as I knew you would, and the perfect person to
uh,
really walk us through this. Michelle, how can people reach you more if they want to hit you about any of these things? Are you on Twitter? Where?
yeah, Twitter at O'Grady_Michelle. Yeah, that's
Perfect.
that's
Well,
pretty much it. Yeah.
listeners, you have been listening to Michelle O'Grady, who has given us cognitive dissonance. She's thrown down an asylum challenge. She's done a lot for the Mike Muse show today, folks. Again, you can always tweet me for more information at I am Mike Muse, MUSSAME. As always, on the Sirius XM Insight channel at SXM Insight. But stay with us, folks. On the other side of the break, we have another fantastic guest who's going to do a deep dive into the why we're in the position we're in through policy. Come on back, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Mike Muse Show. Man, that was such a good conversation that we had with Michelle O'Grady, really talking about perceptions and media. There's so many layers to unpack regarding this whole crisis at the border with this migrant caravan that's coming from Central America through Mexico and possibly hitting the United States borders of asylum seekers. And it's just so many layers to go through. And that's why I want to have some really interesting guests to really help us moderate through this conversation. Just talk to individuals who are deeply rooted in this work and deeply rooted in finding solutions and opportunities to figure out, how do we get out of the situation? But then really understanding how to get out of the situation, we have to talk about how we even got into the situations to begin with. And listen, folks, I have a heavy hitter who is coming up next. She goes by the name of Jessica Reeves. Jessica Reeves is the Chief Operating Officer of Voto Latino. Yeah, that's right, folks. I get some pretty cool guests on the Mike Muse Show. In her role, she's responsible for developing and managing key partnerships and programs that help to advance organizations' mission to bring new and diverse voices into the political process by engaging youth, media, technology, and celebrities to promote positive images. See, we're just talking about that, folks, positive images. Since joining Vote Latino, she's been a leading player with the organization and cultivating partnerships with media, corporations, and nonprofits to develop wide impact civic engagement, including the National Voter Registration Drive back in 2012. So welcome, Jessica Reeves, to the Mike Muse Show. How are you, my friend?
Good, good. Thanks so much, Mike, for having me.
Did I get
Excited to
everything
chat with
right?
you.
You have an impressive bio, my friend.
Oh, you're sweet. Thank you.
Well, Jessica, look, let's just get into for some of those before we dive into the migrant story. For some individuals who may not be familiar with Voto Latino as I am, why don't you give me a little background about Voto Latino and why it got started and its mission?
Sure, sure. Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So, Voto Latino really came about. It started in 2004. Came about because there was a hole and a lack of outreach being done to young Latinos, specifically, young American Latinos in English, through pop culture, through media, through avenues that they were engaging in. Online, through their cell phone technology. So fast forward 14 years now, and that's definitely a cost of entry, right? Talking to Latinx young folks to really, really bring them into the political process by empowering them through Voto Latino does a number of different sorts of campaigns and projects. Through our work, we focus on civic engagement, which is a lot of voter registration, get out the vote, initiatives. We just wrapped up our biggest year ever this midterm, which is crazy because midterms are usually less engaging and less exciting than presidential. But we registered over 200,000 young people and brought them into the political process.
Congratulations, Jessica,
so really,
to your organization.
Thank you. Really exciting year. But the rest other years and in off years, we really focus on ensuring that young people have the tools, the information, and everything they need to stay engaged, to talk to their elected officials about the issues that are important to them, like immigration. So we do a lot of issue advocacy. We do a lot of work educating the community through on the ground events, but mostly through digital communications, text message alerts, email campaigns, that sort of thing, to really ensure that folks continue to engage. And the last kind of big piece of our work is leadership development. So once you've mastered the issues, the day-to-day activism, really, really empowering young people to be leaders in their community, to run for office. And one of the most exciting, I think, folks that come out of one of our leadership training programs, we can't take full credit for her, of course. She's a rock star, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez attended one of our leadership trainings in 2013 and said that was, I think, one of the first times she ever thought about running for office.
Jessica, then you can take credit for that. You guys can take credit for
that. We hope a little bit.
Well, congratulations, Jessica. You guys have done a fantastic job. And during the midterm conversations, I saw Vote a Latino pop up everywhere. And so you guys were really active and really out there. And it's so important. And I love how you explain to our listeners the entire ecosystem of the work that you guys are doing. And sometimes some organizations only focus on just singular activities, which is fine. And I think that's important and great too as well. But I love it when organizations have the capacity and everyone isn't able to have the capacity to focus on the holistic approach, from registration to education and to leadership. So cheers to you guys for the work that you guys have done.
And I think the big kind of thing with it too is that we focus on on a really specific group, right? There's a lot of, we focus on young Latinos, and really every year there's close to 1 million young Latinos turning 18. So, and that number I think is growing. So it's really, really, I think, an ongoing process of bringing in all these new folks into the conversation and guiding them.
Well, let's actually go there, because my listeners know that I had someone on from Latino Decisions, which is a polling company that focuses on Latino Hispanic polling, because we were just saying how a lot of times Latinos go underreported in the polling conversations. And to fast forward, we always talk about the youth and how the youth do not show up in elections, and in particular in midterms, but we saw in particular, young Latino voters are absent the polls. What do you think that narrative is going to be now that we saw such large turnout for young Latino voters?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think first you have to also look at the outreach, right? I think that a lot of times young people in general, get their participation and their voting habits from their parents, from their families. When you might come from a family of immigrants, or at some point your grandparents, your family immigrated, they weren't necessarily engaged in the local, in the political process. So if you're not getting that information at home, you're not getting it at school, and campaigns, politicians think that you don't turn out and that you don't matter, there's absolutely no education and no outreach being done to these communities, especially because young Latinos, young people in general, Latinos in general, that group of folks is especially neglected. And the investment in those groups is much lower than many other demographics. So I think first you have to kind of look at the outreach that's done. That's where we really try to fill the gap and ensure that those folks are getting the information that they need. But at the same time, this year I think we were able to prove them wrong, really show that when Latinos are engaged, they turn out. When young people are engaged and empowered to participate, they actually do turn out, and they help, direct the actual conversation and the election. So we did some polling ourselves, actually, specifically for that reason. There is a lot of underrepresentation in for diverse communities, not just Latinos, but a lot of diverse communities, people of color, young people in traditional polling. So we found that 94% of folks who had participated in this election, 94% of Latinos ages 18 to 34, said that they planned on voting again, not only in presidential and major elections, but in local elections as well.
Yeah.
So I think that was a huge learning. And the other thing that we found was that out of the folks that we polled, about a quarter were new voters. So I think really demonstrates the fact that, one, once these folks are engaged, they're going to stay engaged, and two, the outreach works.
Well, as we talk about young voters and engagement, and we can't help talk about technology and the use of technology and how important technology is in terms of getting voices out there and getting policy discourse had through platforms such as Twitter and Instagram. I kind of want to go to YouTube for a second, and we were having a conversation, as you heard, really dealing how YouTube is really helping to shape the narrative and perception of the crisis that we're having at the border currently with the migrant caravan. And what we're noticing is that 52% of the YouTube videos actually show more of a sympathetic narrative to the plight of the migrant caravan, whereas 48% shows a negative of the plight of individuals of the caravan. How do you see young Latinos fitting into this dynamic as we begin to go through and unpack all the layers of exactly what is happening? Do you see more young people involved in the conversation? Do you see young people more involved in trying to bring out the narrative as actually who is coming in seeking legal asylum?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. For us, we really focus on a lot of these social media channels, YouTube, Twitter, other ways to get the word out. And just for our audience, we're seeing a lot of sympathy. So for a lot of young Latinos, I think that their families are might have been through a difficult process of coming into this country, whether undocumented or not, and can relate to the struggles, can relate to the crises that are happening back at home or back in their home countries that actually force somebody to travel thousands of miles with giving up everything they know, everything they love, to try to go to another place for a better life. Mm-hmm. So I think that the sympathy is an important part of why a lot of young Latinos get involved in activism and are so engaged in this issue. It is constantly, while it's not always our top issue, right, for our young Latinos, it is constantly a very important issue. There's about 16 million people living in mixed status families in the U.S. So whether they are undocumented or have understood somebody going through this sort of crisis or not, or whether they actually know somebody, more likely than not.
So let's do something really interesting, Jessica, if you don't mind. So let's have a conversation in response to what I'm about to lay out from the international side. And I would love to hear your response based upon what I say from a domestic lens. And I think it's important as we begin because right now, Jessica, we're not really having the conversations of how we even got here, right? And I think having that conversation is too difficult and it's too challenging and it's not a soundbite, right? And it's not clickbait, right? And so, but here in the Mike Muse Show, we believe in actually going there onto the why. And so then I would love for you to help connect the dots and respond from the domestic issue of how we got here. And so citizens and listeners, as you heard me earlier discuss, to bring the why, the issue really stems in Central America. If we look at the countries like Honduras and Guatemala and the challenges they're facing with a heavy gang recruitment that is happening on a daily basis, that are happening to young kids to be recruited, the violence and the terror that is happening within these cities and these communities. If you're afraid to go outside of your home, how then can you expect to go and look for work? And then what kind of work is actually sound for you to even have when gangs are terrorizing neighborhoods and probably have some of these individuals on the payroll? Then what happens when we have these individuals who are afraid to go to school so then they can't learn? And then what happens to, from a policy point of view, when we actually don't even have an ambassador in Honduras currently right now to help us navigate this space? And listeners, I'm a big fan of soft diplomacy. I talk about this on soft diplomacy a lot on the show and the importance of economic development, education, right? And the system of could that be the why? And could that be a solution where if our current government was to work closely with the governments of Honduras and Guatemala to really figure out solutions to try and prevent the gang violence and the corruption and to bring some type of jobs and stabilities and build more of a sound education system so other individuals will feel more safe to want to even stay in that position. And then even as they get up to the border, as they go through south of Mexico and they head north into Mexico, and as they apply for legal asylum, and again, listeners, it's legal. America has allows constitutionally individuals to seek asylum no matter what country they are, but they physically have to be present in order to apply for that. And so what is to be said now as the Trump administration begins to change that policy, right, and say that they're going to process those in Mexico? Is that even constitutional? Is that legal? And then from a perspective of the rate that we're allowing applications to be filed, we're down to about 100 per day, right, when you have thousands of individuals seeking asylum and now the current court is backlogged. And so you have all this ripple effect that is causing the why that you see all this action that took place on the border on Sunday. And so Jessica, I kind of just outlaid just the 30,000-foot perspective of the why and set the stage from the international perspective. How do you see it from a domestic lens and a domestic point of view from policy?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think you laid out really beautifully how we kind of got here. And I think that actually points to the fact that, if this administration wanted to actually solve this crisis, there are a lot of ways to go about it. I think there are a lot of things that you can do through diplomacy, through international cooperation and work with these countries who have folks fleeing to our borders. But I think that actually gets to the point is that this is a fabricated crisis. This is not. We don't actually have a crisis at the border. We do not have a imminent threat to our sovereignty, which is, I think, what I saw Secretary Nielsen put out in her in a statement. There is no actual threat to our country. This is a fabricated crisis that plays into a larger narrative that allows, I think, the administration to vilify people coming to the border, vilify these young children, mothers, families coming to, like you were saying, lawfully and legally seek asylum, which they are entitled to do not only through our Constitution, but according to international agreements and legislation. So I think that's the whole point, right. Because a court recently struck down the administration's attempt to stop people from coming to the border and seeking asylum, and ruled that the administration can't actually do that they can't change immigration policy through executive orders and through without going through the proper processes. This feels like a fabricated crisis that will allow the president and the administration to send thousands and thousands of troops to deal with refugees, which is I think really, really tough when we criticize other countries for doing similar things, firing at people throwing rocks with guns, with tear gas, is something that we would be upset about other countries doing. But yet here we are doing this on our borders, where instead of sending thousands and thousands of troops, we should be sending, if we really want to solve this crisis, we should be sending lawyers and judges to process asylum cases, and either allow folks to enter legally or, deny their case and send them on their way. There are a lot of ways to, I think, address the issue at the border. It's definitely not a crisis, a threat to our national security. It's not any of those things. But I think the visuals of it, sending down troops, throwing tear gas, actually creates a false narrative and creates this idea that we have to fight these people who are coming, trying to come. They're not coming, right? Nobody crossed the border illegally. Nobody come
right.
through. They're trying to come lawfully, follow our rules, follow the direction that we're giving, come to the border to seek asylum. And here we are trying to change the rules, trying to change the situation on them.
Jessica, I knew you were the perfect...
I think it's morally wrong.
You nailed it. I knew you were the perfect guest to have on to really help us walk us through. And you nailed so many points that I want to highlight from this perspective. And listeners, no matter where you sit on this, right, and you may believe that America can absorb to have an influx of individuals to become citizens of the United States. And you may feel that that is a problem and that is an issue. You have the right to feel that way. And I think where we should have this conversation is how do we look at comprehensive immigration reform, right? And I think that's how we address that issue. issue. So it doesn't really matter, if
You
you
know,
believe they should or should not be here. We're not here to really debate the
exactly.
merit of that. I think with Jessica and I, and what I intend to do with this show is just to really peel back the layers to figure out what is actually happening and the why. And Jessica, you raised something really interesting about the troops. And, my listeners know that I've been reporting on this for a while on this false narratives. And I'm not even going to go into was or was it not a political ploy during the midterms to send our troops there to kind of create this false insecurities that we have. But what is a fact, though, is that we're spending over $200 million to have those troops being stationed down there at the border at Texas. And Jessica, what you point that you raise is, could we allocate those resources better in terms of lawyers? But Jessica, I will even raise you one and say, should we allocate that fund for the judges? Because listeners, the immigration courts down there are severely understaffed. And that is the reason why they're having difficulty processing the amount of cases that they have there already. So imagine if we had allocated that $200 million towards judges. The judges then could make more determinate factors much more quicker if these asylum cases should even be processed, or should they be turned around on spot? And then should we use that solution, Jessica, that money to allocate that $200 million? Should we use that towards, ankle monitors, or, in order to, or if they are able to come in, they come back for another hearing, we can monitor them and find out where they are, and that'll be a better use of resources. And so it goes exactly to what you're saying, is that there is so much better use cases that we can have with that allocation of funds and money. Is this what you're seeing too as well?
Yeah, and I think, the other thing kind of on that point is it also feels like a feeding into a narrative that we need a border wall, which other, border experts, I'm actually from the border. I'm from El Paso, Texas. Grew up on the border my entire life. And it is one of the safest cities in the country for its size. There is no need for 5,800 troops to be sent down to guard against a few thousand women and children. That's more than one military personnel per person. But I think this actually feeds into what you guys were talking about, creating narratives and creating fear at critical times. There's another critical deadline coming up, approval for the budget. Congress is set to review and approve budgets for the coming year at the end of this year. Is this, going to feed into that narrative? Is it a, negotiation tactic? Personally, I don't feel like our troops and women and children should, be a part of a negotiating tactic. So if everybody could really, really take this for what it is and see, I think, past the fear mongering and see past, these false narratives and look at where the money is being spent, what is actually happening, what the data is showing. I think we could be a lot more constructive to actually solve the problem of, these refugees and our immigration system.
Well, Jessica, as we wrap up the show, I want to give you a chance to do two things. One, to give your personal point of view, and then the second part, I want to ask you, how can we be solution-oriented and advance some of these causes through technology? But I had the chance to ask Michelle O'Grady, her personal feel and how she feels about witnessing that, coming from like Mexican heritage and living in Mexico for some time, and also too living in Los Angeles. And I want you to, if you can, remove the hat of a Latino just for a second. And I talked about how I felt about this, watching this personally, right? And I'm not Latino heritage, and I'm really bothered by the images, and I'm really bothered by the perception that is out there. And so I didn't even know you're from a border town, and so that's what's making me really want to ask you just personally, how do you feel when you see this? Because I think sometimes we forget about the human nature and the human characteristic of the story. Sometimes we get so caught up, myself included, pundit, policymakers, think tanks. We get so caught up in just doing our jobs that we lose the human aspect and the human narrative. So, just from that perspective.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I'm originally from the border. I have a lot of family that's still in Mexico. I spent a lot of my time growing up going back and forth on the border. The border is a living, breathing community. El Paso, Texas, and Juarez make up one of the largest if not the largest, I think, international border communities in the world. And it's functioned that way for centuries. It was before it was part of the United States, it was part of a lot of other countries. And I think to vilify these communities, to vilify the natural ebb and flow of migration, it really, really shows the lack of understanding of how international trade, commerce, how these communities function. And sending, troops to the border like that to Tijuana, I think it really, really shows the lack of understanding that our administration has and how little they value, I think, our communities too, which is, for me personally, particularly upsetting. But it also, I think, makes me that much more, resolved in trying to bring attention to these issues and trying to highlight the injustices, the damage that's being done, and to bring to light I think what are the underlying issues that we're dealing with versus what's on the surface and what people are just seeing on the news and seeing on YouTube, seeing spread over social media.
Yeah.
So for me, it's even more important.
I couldn't think of a better way actually just to end on that. I think it's on such a personal note. I think it's important that, it's not easy to give our personal perspectives because we're so focused just on policy and sticking to the facts and sticking to the data. But, there's a human interest in this and there's a human story. And it's not to sway you either way, but it's just to give context to the situation that's happening. Yep. Jessica, thank you so much for your time and your brilliancy and for bringing your whole self to the Mike Muse show. I really appreciate it. How can individuals engage with you in Voto Latino more going forward just around this conversation we're having right now in terms of the migrant caravan and beyond?
Sure. So you can email us if you have questions at info@votolatino.org, but also check out our website, votolatino.org. Sign up for our emails. You can sign up for information there and follow us across social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. That's where we send most of our communications. So.
And what's your handle on social media and Twitter?
My handle, for Voto Latino, it's just Voto Latino. For me, it's at Reeves, JLR.
Okay, say your personal one more time.
At Reeves, JLR.
And she's spelled Reeves, ladies and gentlemen. Jessica Reeves, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. I look forward to staying in touch with you, my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, that has been our show for the Mike Muse Show. You guys are awesome. Don't forget to tweet me at I am Mike Muse, MUSNSAME, and right here on the Insight channel at SXM Insight. Until we meet again next week, folks. Peace.